Is the sport of motocross in Southern California officially dead? What once was a absolute moto mecca has been on the decline throughout the years, and more recently, things are really coming crashing down. Southern California used to be filled with iconic brands, manufacturers, riders, and tracks everywhere. We've seen iconic brands like FMF, Pro Circuit, Troy Lee Designs, Fox, and even more recently, One Industries all be formed in Southern California. And we used to see a large amount of pro riders living in Southern California. In the last 10 years or so, it seems like there's been quite a shift with a lot of tracks closing and riders moving. Both Florida and Georgia have seen an increase in moto activity. And while motocross tracks closing in California is nothing new, we saw Saddleback close over 40 years ago, and the land that it once sat on is still largely undeveloped. Nonetheless, it feels like this last decade has been exceptionally brutal on tracks closing. So what I want to do today is kind of go over the last 10 years or so of the Southern California tracks and their history, and what tracks have closed, and what the future outlook of Southern California and the sport of motocross might look like. So recently, people have been kind of up in arms in Southern California as two of the major tracks around here have just announced that they're closing. Lake Elsinore and LACR are both closing for different reasons, but I believe the root of this issue lies a little bit deeper. So we're going to go a little bit further back, and then we'll circle back to that at the end. If you just look back at the last 10 years, you can point to at least 9 tracks in the area that have closed. So we're going to go all the way back through the history of those tracks and talk about what got them closed and what their outlook of the future might be. So let's get into it. The first track we're going to talk about is going to be Piru MX, also known as Lemon Grove. So looking at the track, it's in a pretty isolated area north of Simi Valley, just west of the Six Flags Magic Mountain. So they closed quite a while back. There's not a lot on social media regarding the issues on why they closed and things like that. But what I can tell you for sure is that in 2014, there was a fatal accident there. And it sounds like there was quite a bit of backlash with that. But then afterwards, there was a movie film there. And it looks like Robbie Wageman and his dad got involved and were kind of running the track. So not sure exactly where it all went wrong, but they've been closed for quite a while. Then in June of 2017, we had AV Motoplex shut down, and that track was kind of in the vicinity of LACR. So the majority of the staff there kind of went to LACR as well as Cal City, and they just kind of diversified into those areas. Then unfortunately, about a year after that, in May of 2018, the legendary Zaca Station track closed. And that was for different reasons. It sounds like it was kind of a family-owned property, and it sounds like the county of Santa Barbara was putting some pressure on them to basically go ahead and shut that thing down. It was private land, but it sounds like they were going to mess with the property owners and try to, do some weird things with their taxes or whatever. It's kind of speculation, but either way, the property owner basically said, look, I got to shut the track down. Really unfortunate because it was an absolutely beautiful track and facility. A lot of people loved riding there. It was fairly isolated, as some motocross tracks are, but either way, 2018, Zaca Station gets shut down. Then at the end of 2018, unfortunately, we saw Comp Edge MX get shut down, and that track was actually at a pretty good location. It was in the high desert, but it was just at the top of the Cajon Pass, really right off the freeway. It wasn't really that far from Glen Helen. There were some conflicting reports about why it was shut down. Some were speculating that it was going to be developed, and some were speculating that it was other things. But thankfully, there was another track just down the street called Racetown, also known as Sunrise, and they basically just moved over there and started working with that track. But unfortunately, that was short-lived, and that ended up closing in July of the following year. So that kind of killed that whole section of tracks. And that also kind of started what felt like a wave of tracks just closing one after the other. At the end of that year, we saw an iconic track in Milestone getting shut down. They'd had their issues throughout the years, and they lost their lights due to supposedly someone had tried to put in an offer to buy the place, and they rejected that offer. And then they made an issue out of their lights not being permitted and got those taken away. The important thing to note with Milestone is that it was kind of in the center of a lot of things. It was basically in Riverside, which is surrounded by cities in all directions. So it was an ideal location logistically, but it was also built in a flood zone and basically like a wash. So it was understandable why that real estate was intriguing for developers, but it was also going to be very hard to develop. Nonetheless, they kept trying to buy the land. Thankfully, it was discovered that in the 1950s, there was a spillway easement created in that area, which made it even harder for developers to be able to come in and actually build something on there. Just to begin the building process, they would have to build everything up about 15 feet and get the easement officially removed from that area. But sure enough, they were able to get all of that pulled off, and then at the end of 2019, as I was saying, Milestone ended up having to close down. It ended up being developed by FedEx. That was a pretty big blow. It was very centrally located, and it was a nice facility. Also easily accessed with like 3 different freeways on each side of it. Now, the owners of Milestone were supposedly developing a new track not that far away. They were supposed to call it JS63MX. They even uploaded some videos showing the facility and what it should eventually be like, but unfortunately that hasn't come to fruition, and it doesn't look like it ever will. They also revived the dead Star West and renamed it State Fair MX. So thankfully that did give us a new place to ride, at least for the time being. But unfortunately, State Fair MX ended up having to close in May of 2022. Supposedly that was due to a flood control channel project, as it's built basically butting up against the Lake Paris Dam. There was also some speculation that people just didn't like having the noise from the motocross track, but the track was built on state fairground property, and they do run car races on the fair property, which are a lot louder, so hard to say if that's really the case. Either way, State Fair is now closed. It's definitely possible that it could be redeveloped in the future. The track is still undeveloped into anything else, really. And while the fairgrounds do have other sources of income, none of it's really that great. So it seems like bringing back State Fair or Star West at some point in the future, it's definitely possible, but as of right now, nothing is for sure. Then, as I was saying at the beginning of the video, we recently had 2 more tracks close their doors. So unfortunately, Lake Elsinore ended up closing their doors at the end of the year. And that was supposedly due to a lawsuit due to a fatality that they had earlier on in the year. Unfortunately, a young girl lost her life at the facility. Now, there is a lot to unpack here. The owner and operator of Lake Elsinore Motocross put out a statement saying that due to the lawsuit, they can no longer run the track. But interestingly enough, Lake Elsinore City Councilman put out a statement, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically said, look, I've heard a lot of rumors on the internet, and just so you guys all know, what's actually happening is the person that is owner of the property that the track sits on is selling the property. Once the property is no longer in escrow and there's a new property owner, the city will be talking directly with the new property owner, explaining the value that the motocross park brings and the tradition of motocross in the city of Lake Elsinore. And basically, we're going to try to get them to reopen the track as soon as possible, but we can't actually make a property owner do something with their land that they don't want to do. So as far as Lake Elsinore goes, it looks like there could be a chance that they could reopen sometime in the future, but it doesn't even sound like they have an official buyer yet for the land, and I'm sure it is going to be quite expensive. Who would buy that exactly, I'm not sure. And when they do not have to open the track. That's going to be basically up to them. But definitely some hope there for Lake Elsinore. Now, as far as LACR, they're in a similar situation that they were also shut down because of a lawsuit, but for different reasons. So unfortunately, there was an injury and then a lawsuit, and now they are having a very hard time finding insurance. They've gone through every option that their brokers have offered. Nobody's willing to insure the track. And so because of that, they have to shut down because they just don't have insurance. It sounds like that's really the limiting factor, is just trying to find an insurance company that will cover the racing at LACR. And it sounds like they're actively looking for a solution. But the fact that they were able to get to this point is definitely not a good sign. Really hate to see that for them. It seems like it's a great family, great facility. So with all of those tracks closing all relatively close to each other, is there even a moto community still in Southern California? Well, obviously we do have Glen Helen, we still have Fox Raceway down in Paula, and there's still Paris Raceway, which is right down the street from State Fair. There's also a track up in Anza, and then there's Cal City MX for the guys that are over by LACR and stuff like that. With all that being said, though, it is becoming extremely inconvenient to try to be participating in the sport of motocross in Southern California, and it really sucks to see. It seems like everyone's always trying to develop over the tracks or get the track shut down due to noise and dirt. And it does seem like what was once the capital of motocross racing is now becoming completely against motocross racing. You still have some signs of motocross, you know, with the test tracks for some of the teams, as well as KTM with their big facility that they just built. And a lot of the media platforms are based out of California, so Moto's definitely not dead yet, but I think it could be on its way out. It would be really cool to see everything turn a corner here and get some of these tracks reopened and maybe even build a new track, kind of like that JS63MX Vision was originally looking like. It's definitely been frustrating to see something that was so great get taken away little by little. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Do you think that there is any hope for motocross in Southern California? Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.